took it from us. Not with armies, not with fire, with silence. For 3,000 years, the most powerful object in human history has been missing, and the world has simply accepted that. But I was there. I know what happened. I know where it went. And tonight, for the first time, I am going to tell you everything. They called it the Ark of the Covenant, a golden chest carried by priests that brought down walls, parted rivers, and struck men dead where they stood. Kings wanted it. Empires hunted it. Scholars have spent their entire lives chasing its shadow, and yet it vanished. Just like that. Gone from the pages of history as if it never existed. But here is what they never told you. There are two truths about where the Ark is right now.
Understood that the
two
true
completely
measure of
different answers,
civilization
both
is
with
not its
evidence,
wealth,
both with
its
witnesses, both with scripture to back them up. One says it was destroyed, burned to ash when Babylon came and took everything. The other says it never left, that it is still there, still guarded, still breathing. By the end of this video, you will have to choose which truth you believe, because only one of them changes everything. Stay with me, because this story begins long before the silence did. My name is not important. What I carry is. I am the last in a line that stretches back further than memory. A line of men chosen not by birth, not by wealth, but by one single calling to guard what God placed in human hands. And what God placed in human hands was never meant to be understood, only protected. You have heard of the Ark of the Covenant. Everyone has. But what most people imagine, a golden box from a Hollywood film, is not even close to what it truly was. The Ark was built by Moses himself, following instructions given directly by God on Mount Sinai. Acacia wood overlaid with pure gold. Two golden cherubim facing each other across the mercy seat. And inside the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, Aaron's rod, a jar of manna from the wilderness. It was not a relic. It was not a trophy. It was the living presence of God on earth. The book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 22, records the words spoken to Moses directly there. I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, I will speak with you. This was not a jest. This was a throne. For centuries, the Ark traveled with the Israelites through the wilderness. It crossed the Jordan River. It brought down the walls of Jericho. It sat at the heart of Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, the most sacred object in the ancient world. And then somewhere between the reign of Solomon and the fall of Jerusalem, it disappeared. No burial record. No inventory list. No mention of it being carried away. Just silence. That silence is what I have spent my entire life inside of. And tonight I am going to break it. There are two answers to where the Ark went. Two paths that history has tried to erase. I have walked both of them. I have seen what lies at the end of each one. The first path leads east, across desert and ocean, to a land ancient beyond reckoning. The second path leads into fire, into ash, into the ruins of everything Jerusalem once was. I will show you both. But first you need to understand what was truly at stake. Because this was never just about a golden chest. This was about whether God keeps his promises. Let me take you to a place most people have never heard of. A small city in the northern highlands of Ethiopia. Ancient, quiet, surrounded by mountains that have not changed in 3,000 years. Its name is Axum. And if you know where to look and if they allow you close enough, you will find a small, unremarkable chapel sitting beside one of the oldest churches in the world. The Chapel of the Tablet. Inside that chapel, according to every priest, every monk, every guardian who has served there for the last 2,000 years sits the Ark of the Covenant. Not a replica, not a symbol, the real one. Now I know what you are thinking. Ethiopia? How? When? Why would the most sacred object in Jewish history end up in East Africa? That is exactly the question they do not want you to ask. Because the answer goes back further than most scholars are willing to admit. The story begins with a king, a queen, and a child that history almost erased. You know, her is the Queen of Sheba. The Bible records her visit to King Solomon in Jerusalem, a journey of thousands of miles just to sit with the wisest man who ever lived. They spoke. They debated. They shared something that the scriptures only hint at. And when she left Jerusalem, she was carrying more than wisdom. According to Ethiopian royal chronicles, the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings, written and preserved for over 700 years, the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopia as Makeda, returned home carrying Solomon's child. That child was named Menelik. And when Menelik came of age, he traveled to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon received him with honor. He was educated in the temple. He learned the sacred laws. He walked the halls where the ark itself resided. And when it was time for Menelik to return to Ethiopia, he did not go alone. The priests who accompanied him, the firstborn sons of the high priests of Israel, they could not bear to leave the ark behind. They believed Ethiopia was the new sacred land. They believed the ark belonged with Menelik, the son of Solomon, the heir of David. So they took it. They carried it across the desert, across the Red Sea, into the highlands of Ethiopia, and it has never left. This is not mythology. This is not legend dressed up as history. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has maintained an unbroken chain of guardians for over 2 millennia. Each guardian, called the keeper of the ark, serves for life.
Please hear my prayer.
He is
Grant us
chosen
strength
young.
and guide us through
He
the
never
darkness.
leaves the chapel
Amen.
grounds. He sees no one. He speaks to almost no one. I know what that life looks like, because I have lived inside that silence. The weight of what is kept there, it is not something you carry in your hands. You carry it in your chest, every single day. And I will tell you this much: what is inside the chapel in Axum is not nothing. The priests do not guard nothing. But let me go deeper. Because the Ethiopia theory is not just a story passed down by priests around a fire. It is backed by something that Western scholarship has spent decades trying to explain away. In 1992, a British historian named Graham Hancock published a book called The Sign and the Seal. He spent years traveling through Ethiopia, interviewing guardians, studying the Kebra Nagast, cross-referencing archaeological records. His conclusion was not comfortable for the academic establishment. He argued that the timeline fits, that the architectural evidence in Axum fits, that the religious practices of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, practices that predate Christianity itself, practices rooted in ancient Mosaic law, fit a community that had been in direct
Father,
contact with the Ark for centuries.
And mercy.
The Ethiopian
Amen.
priests do not just claim to have the Ark. They live as if they have always had it. Think about what that means for a moment. Every church in Ethiopia, every single one, has at its center a replica of the Ark, called a tabot. The tabot is treated with the same reverence the original received in Solomon's temple. It is wrapped. It is carried in procession. It is never touched by unconsecrated hands. This is not decoration. This is not tradition for the sake of tradition. This is a people who have structured their entire spiritual identity around the physical presence of the Ark of the Covenant. You do not build a civilization around a memory. You build it around something real. And then there is the matter of the guardian himself. Every Western journalist, every archaeologist, every documentary crew that has ever traveled to Axum has been stopped at the same point. The outer courtyard of the chapel of the tablet. No one gets closer. No one is allowed inside. Not the Ethiopian government. Not the patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Not even the most senior priests. Only one man has ever seen what is inside the chapel. The guardian. And every guardian who has ever held that post has said the same thing, in the same words, passed down through centuries of unbroken testimony. It is here. It has always been here. And it will remain here until the end of the world. I have heard those words spoken in the dark, in a voice so steady it could only come from a man who has seen something the rest of the world has not. The book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 35, verse 3 records a moment that many scholars overlook entirely. King Josiah, just decades before the Babylonian conquest, gives an instruction to the Levite priests that has puzzled historians for centuries. He tells them, put the holy ark in the house that Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. You need not carry it on your shoulders. Read that again. Josiah is telling the priests to put the ark back, to stop carrying it. Which means at some point before the Babylonian invasion, the ark had already been moved, already been taken somewhere, already been traveling. The priests were carrying it somewhere. Before Babylon ever arrived at the gates of Jerusalem, where were they taking it? The Ethiopian guardians have always known the answer to that question. I have stood in the highlands of Axum at dawn. I have watched the light come over those mountains the same way it must have come over Sinai 3,000 years ago. And I will tell you what I felt standing there. I felt the weight of something that does not belong to any one people. something that belongs to all of humanity. Something that has been kept safe not because men are strong enough to protect it, but because something greater than man has decided it is not yet time. That feeling does not come from nothing. That feeling comes from proximity. But wait. There is something that historians have hidden for centuries. Something the church did not put in the official record. Something that does not fit the Ethiopia story no matter how carefully you arrange the evidence. Because if the Ark is in Axum, then why does the oldest continuous record of its existence simply stop, not fade, not transfer? Stop. Right at the moment Babylon arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. If this story is moving something deep inside you right now, just type amen in the comments.
The truth is a heavy
Let me know you are here with me.
no longer bear alone.
Because what I am about to tell you next I have never said out loud before. Everything I just told you is true. But so is this. I need you to sit with what I am about to say. Because this is the part that kept me awake for years. The part that made me question everything I thought I knew about what I was guarding. About what I was living my life inside of. What if the Ark is not in Ethiopia? What if it was never taken anywhere? What if it was destroyed completely, finally, permanently on the 9th day of Av, 587 BC? When the Babylonian army of Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls of Jerusalem and burned Solomon's temple to the ground? I know how that sounds. I know what it costs to even say those words out loud. But I have spent enough time in silence to know that silence is not always protection. Sometimes silence is just the space where an uncomfortable truth has been waiting. So let me show you what the evidence actually says. Because here is what most people do not realize about the Babylonian conquest. This was not a raid. This was not a quick strike and retreat. Nebuchadnezzar's army surrounded Jerusalem for 18 months. 18 months of siege, of starvation, of watching everything collapse from the inside before the walls ever came down. And when those walls finally broke, the Babylonians were systematic, methodical. They did not just burn and leave. They cataloged everything. The Book of 2 Kings records in extraordinary detail exactly what the Babylonian army took from Solomon's temple. Column by column, object by object. The bronze pillars, the bronze sea, the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the dishes, the fire pans. Every single item listed, accounted for, carried to Babylon. And the Ark of the Covenant? Not mentioned. Not on the list. Not carried away. Not described as destroyed. Not referenced at all. It simply disappears from the historical record at exactly the moment when everything else in the temple is being meticulously documented. Now ask yourself, what does that absence mean? There are only 2 logical explanations for why the most valuable, most sacred, most powerful object in the entire temple is missing from the Babylonian inventory. Either it was already gone before they arrived, or it was destroyed so completely that there was nothing left to catalog. The Ethiopia theory depends entirely on the first explanation, on a secret removal, on a chain of custody that somehow left no trace in any contemporary Jewish record. But the second explanation requires nothing extraordinary at all. Fire destroys wood, even wood overlaid with gold, and the gold itself melted down, unrecognizable, added to the general treasury of Babylon, would leave no record either. Think about the timeline for a moment. The last time the ark appears clearly in any biblical narrative is during the reign of Solomon. After that, silence. Across the reigns of multiple kings, across centuries of Jewish history, no mention of it being consulted, no mention of it being carried into battle, no mention of it performing miracles, no mention of it at all. For an object described as the living throne of God, that silence is extraordinary, because the earlier scriptures never let you forget it was there. Every movement, every miracle, every moment of divine contact was recorded. And then nothing. That kind of silence does not usually mean the thing is being secretly protected somewhere. That kind of silence usually means the thing is gone. I remember the first time this thought came to me clearly. I was sitting alone in the dark, as I always was, and I asked myself a question I had never allowed myself to ask before. What if I am not guarding the ark? What if I am guarding the idea of the ark? What if the most important thing humanity ever held was taken from us, not by thieves, not by armies, but by time itself? That question did not leave me. It still has not. Because here is what the destruction theory asks you to consider. If the ark was destroyed in 587 BC, then God allowed it to be destroyed. And if God allowed it, then perhaps the ark was never meant to be permanent. Perhaps it was always meant to be a moment, a meeting point, a place where heaven touched earth for a season and then withdrew. Perhaps the question was never where the ark went. Perhaps the question was always, what were we supposed to learn while it was here?
Do you believe what you read?
Let me show you something that the Ethiopia theory cannot answer. Something that has been sitting in plain sight for 2,000 years inside the most carefully preserved religious texts in human history. When the Jewish people returned from Babylonian exile after 70 years of captivity, they came back to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple. We call it the Second Temple. And when they rebuilt it, when they restored the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber where the ark had once resided, they left that chamber empty. Deliberately, intentionally, empty. Not because they forgot. Not because they ran out of materials. Not because they did not know what belonged there. Because they knew the ark was gone. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century AD, describes the Holy of Holies of the Second Temple in extraordinary detail. He describes the curtain, the incense altar, the lampstand, the table of showbread, and then he stops, because there was nothing else to describe. The room at the center of the most sacred building in the ancient world, the room that had once held the presence of God himself, was completely bare. Every priest who served in the temple for 500 years walked past an empty room. Every high priest who entered the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, the one day per year when entry was permitted, entered an empty room. They did not enter to approach the ark. They entered to approach the memory of it.
No evidence.
Now
You
here
ask
is
me to
what that
believe
means
without
for the Ethiopia theory.
Belief does not always require
If the
sight.
ark had been safely
Logic
carried to
demands
Axum,
proof.
if the priests
How
knew
can you
where it
present
was,
such nonsense
if there
as
was an
fact?
unbroken chain of custody, why would the returning Jewish community leave the Holy of Holies empty? Why would they not send for it? Why would they not restore it to its rightful place at the center of Jewish worship? The Ethiopia theory requires us to believe that the Jewish leadership, desperate to rebuild their nation, their identity, their covenant relationship with God, simply chose to leave the most sacred object in their history sitting in a foreign country, unclaimed, unreturned, forgotten. That does not fit the character of a people who memorized every law, preserved every scroll, and wept for 70 years beside the rivers of Babylon. The Book of Maccabees, preserved in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, contains a passage that cuts directly to the heart of this question. The prophet Jeremiah, just before the fall of Jerusalem, is described as having hidden certain sacred objects. The text is careful, deliberate. It lists what was hidden, but it does not list the ark among the things that survived. What it says instead is this: that these things would not be found again until God Himself chose to gather His people together and show mercy. Not until a human guardian located them. Not until an archaeological expedition uncovered them. Until God Himself acted. That passage changed something in me when I first read it. Because it did not give me hope that the ark was somewhere waiting to be found. It gave me permission to grieve what was lost, to sit with the reality that some things, even sacred things, are taken from us, and that the taking is not the end of the story. Maybe the ark was destroyed in 587 BC. Maybe the fire that took Solomon's temple took everything inside it. Maybe God allowed the most tangible expression of His presence on earth to turn to us because He was about to offer something more permanent than gold in acacia wood. Something that could not be besieged, could not be captured, could not be carried into exile. There is one document the church did not want you to read. A record so precise, so uncomfortable, that it has been quietly moved to the margins of academic discussion for over a century. And it does not support either side of this argument cleanly. It supports something far more unsettling. Stay with me, because the verdict is not what you are expecting. So here is where we are. 2,000 years of scholarship. Two completely different answers. Two chains of evidence, both real, both documented, both impossible to dismiss entirely. Let me put them side by side for you. Not to tell you which one is right, but to show you exactly what each one asks you to believe. What Scripture actually records. The Ark of the Covenant is first described in Exodus, built by Moses, carried by priests, the physical meeting point between God and humanity. It crossed the Jordan. It brought down Jericho. It sat at the heart of Solomon's temple for centuries. And then in the historical record it stops. No dramatic exit. No funeral. No final resting place confirmed by any contemporary Jewish source. Just silence. What the first path asks you to believe: that the ark was removed from Jerusalem before the Babylonian invasion. carried by priests, the sons of Israel's high priests, along a chain of custody that runs through the royal bloodline of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Taken to Ethiopia, placed in Axum, guarded by an unbroken line of keepers for over 2,000 years. The evidence, the Kebra Nagast, the architectural record of Axum, the religious practices of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, practices so ancient and so mosaic in character that they cannot be explained without direct contact with the Ark itself, and the testimony of every guardian who has ever served at the chapel of the tablet. This theory asks you to believe in a secret kept perfectly for 3 millennia, a secret that an entire nation built its spiritual identity around. What the second path asks you to believe, that the Ark was destroyed when Babylon took Jerusalem in 587 BC. That its absence from the Babylonian inventory means it was burned, the wood consumed, the gold melted into the general treasury of an empire. That the empty Holy of Holies of the Second Temple is the most honest monument to what was lost. That the Jewish community who returned from exile left that room empty, not out of ignorance but out of grief, out of knowledge. This theory asks you to believe that God allowed His most tangible presence on earth to be destroyed, and that this was not a failure but a transition. From a God who dwelt in a golden chest to a God who could not be contained by wood or gold or stone. Neither theory is comfortable. Neither theory is complete. And 2,000 years of the greatest scholars, priests, archaeologists, and historians who ever lived have not been able to settle it. Today it is your turn. If you believe someone you love needs to hear this today, share this video right now. That is your blessing to give them.
You stand on the precipice.
Because this
What comes
story
next
does
will
not
define
belong to
generations.
scholars.
Heed my words.
It does
or
not
all
belong
is
to
lost.
priests or guardians or documentary filmmakers. It belongs to anyone who has ever looked up at the sky and asked, is God still there? Did He leave? Or has He been here all along, closer than I realized? Share it.
Let us
Right
set aside
now,
what we felt, and
for
look
them.
only to the texts.
Everything you
The
heard
records
today
state
comes from
unequivocally
the book of Exodus, chapter 25, the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 35, the book of 2 Kings, chapters 24 and 25, the Kebra Nagast, the glory of kings, the royal chronicle of Ethiopia, preserved for over 700 years. The research of historian Graham Hancock, documented in the Sign on the Seal, published 1992. The writings of Flavius Josephus, Jewish historian of the 1st century AD, and 2 Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 4 through 8, preserved in the Septuagint. Full links and references are in the description below. Every source is real. Every document exists. Go check them yourselves. That is what this channel asks of you, not blind faith. Informed faith. Now you know what I know. You have walked both paths with me. You have seen the evidence on both sides. You have sat inside the silence that has surrounded this question for 3,000 years. And I am not going to tell you what to believe. That has never been my job. My job, the only job I have ever had, is to guard what was entrusted to me. Whether that is a golden chest sitting in a chapel in the highlands of Ethiopia, or a question, A, sacred, unresolved, still burning question that humanity has been carrying since the day the walls of Jerusalem fell. Both require a guardian. Both require someone willing to spend their life inside the silence, not to fill it with easy answers but to hold it open. To keep the question alive. Because a question that stays alive is a faith that stays alive. So tell me, team A, the Ark is in Ethiopia. Axum holds the real Ark. The guardians are telling the truth. The Kebra Nagast preserves the real history that the Western world was never meant to find. Or Team B, the Ark was destroyed in 587 BC. The empty Holy of Holies is the answer. God allowed it to be taken because he was preparing something the gold and acacia wood could never contain. Drop your answer below and tell me why. Because 2,000 years of history deserves more than silence. Next time I am going to take you somewhere even older, even darker, even more contested. A story that the church has debated behind closed doors for centuries and that most people sitting in the pews on Sunday morning have never heard. If you believe truth deserves to be heard, you know what to do. The Ark was built to hold the Word of God. But perhaps the greater miracle is that the question itself has never stopped burning. 3,000 years.